downtown Worcester that as early as 1724, people were buried all over this common. So, we have to back up a little bit. In 1713, when Worcester was settled, 1722, it becomes a town. In 1724, this becomes the official cemetery. There's a plaque over there that says 1728, but I think City Hall did the research. It's really 1724. So what was that? 300 years ago. Imagine, in back of me was a big white, what we would call a church, but they called a meeting house. Think about all those town commons you've gone past with that big white building with a steeple. Worcester was a congregational town. You had to be a congregationalist. You paid money to run the congregational church. So that was where you would go not only for worship services on Monday, but that's on Sundays, but that's where you would go to discuss town business. The separation of church and state comes much later. It's one building. So imagine, you've got a building there that's the center of town government, and the practical reality is, as we all know, that no one lives forever, right? So this becomes a burial ground because it's a civic function. It's a town function to get rid of the dead. So if you were here in 1724, this space would be 5 times larger than it is now. Just imagine going almost all the way to Washington Square, maybe beyond. That was the land that was set aside for the common use of everyone. So what do you imagine would be on the common use of everyone? A place you could graze your cattle, a place where the Minutemen on the eve of Lexington and Concord would be drilling. They didn't go from here. It was too far, they were too late. But it's also where you would have a schoolhouse. You would have the town pound for loose animals. You would have the gun shed. Worcester had 2 cannons at the time of the Revolutionary War and a bucket full of gunpowder. That would be on the common. What else would you have? A cemetery. Burial in those days was a civic function. We think of it very much today as related oftentimes to a religion, but those days it was a civic function. In 1728, a man who lived not far from here was hired to sweep out the church and for 4 shillings a year dig all the burial sites. So imagine, it's filled with dead people. Probably 300-400 people, many of whom go unregistered. So jump ahead from that to the 1850s. If you aren't aware, by the 1850s, Worcester is becoming a very heavily industrialized city. Now think about big cities like Paris and London. What are they doing? They're moving their cemeteries out of town. So that's what Worcester wants to do. They want to get rid of this evidence of old decay and dead people. So they lay the gravestones flat, cover them with earth, and pretend they were never there. So if you look over in that corner toward the public library, there are 225 probably people still buried over there who were never disinterred. Why would you dig up people on Worcester Common, other than maybe for sport or a lark or something like that? They were removed in the 1960s for the Worcester Center project. How many of you remember the mall that used to be there and the reflecting pool that was on its way to the Civil War money? In order to build those, the state required that the dead people be removed. So they were dug up and moved to Hope Cemetery. To do that, they used a 19th century map. And the interesting thing was that they got most of them. Many of them had gravestones. Some were 21 feet below the surface of the common today, which tells you that it was very much hilly. So if you go to Hope Cemetery, you can see all the saved gravestones. And if you look in back, you see a little bit of a cemetery. There are a few people whose stones and bodies were reinterred on the common as reference to it. But as you walk toward that corner, toward the Turtle Boy, one of those paths you're walking on is probably on top of a burial. So don't bring your shovel, because you'll get in trouble. But what I want to suggest to you is that as you're sitting here tonight, remember, it may be haunted mansion, but is it haunted common?
Lucky I don't have a shovel.
There are a lot of spirits from Worcester's 300 years of history are surrounding you constantly. So, if there's a tap on your shoulder later, maybe it's somebody who over there who likes the movie, who decided to join you. Who's to know who might be with you tonight on Worcester Ma. So we hope you enjoy the movie. If you have questions about it, I'll be here for a few minutes. I'll be happy to try to tell you a little bit more. But I know you really need some better ghost stories. So I'm going to thank you for coming here, invite you to the Worcester Historical Museum. You can see some historic gravestones from the 1960s removals there. But in the meanwhile, when somebody goes tap, 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 it's not me. It might be somebody from 1720 Worcester. So have a great evening.